Hello, I'm Christie Welch, Direct Marketing Specialist with OSU Extension. Welcome to another episode of Marketing Matters. It's farmers market season. We're going to talk about that. Join us in just a moment. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Marketing Matters. I'm Christie Welch, Direct Marketing Specialist with OSU Extension, and with me today is Patrick Dengel.
Yes, and it's always a pleasure to join with you on some of the marketing matters. And you know, one of the things that I notice that as spring is being sprung, communities are looking for farmer markets again.
Absolutely, Patrick. And so this time of year, as we get close to spring and the start of the growing season here in Ohio, farmers markets begin to open up, and I get lots of calls about communities wanting to start a farmers market in their own communities.
Well, you know, Christie, you have had a long, extensive career, not only personally involved with farmer markets, but at one time you were very actively enjoying the role of building and making stable the different farmer markets. And you know, it's interesting when you go throughout some of the communities, whether it's in a small town or a large town, there are a variety of different farmer markets.
Absolutely, Patrick. And of course, if you visited one farmer's market, typically you visited one farmer's market because they are very individual based on where they're located in the communities that support them.
You know, it's interesting. I always thought farmer markets only sold some produce and some fruits, but I guess there's a variety of different.
That's true, Patrick. And so farmers markets here in Ohio can choose what can be sold at their farmers markets. The truth is, you know, it is a lot of fresh produce based, but we also have a lot of value added type products. We have dairy products, we have meat products, cheeses, honeys, maple syrups. The list goes on and on. It's really a matter of being locally produced, and different markets define that differently. And then figuring out what's best for the consumers in that community is the really critical piece that makes a farmer's market successful. And so some farmers markets include merchants, and so you'll have craft type items or art type items, jewelries. I've even been to a farmer's market where the local downtown merchants supported the farmer's markets, and they set up booths at that market as well, and we're selling things like golf clubs.
That's interesting. So you're talking about communities banding together to have a farmer's market. So who are the community leaders? Is it a designated individual in like the mayor's office or the city manager, or you know, how are they started? So
again, it really depends on the community and who's kind of behind that. A lot of times it's the producers that say, hey, we want to join forces, come together, offer this service to our community, and work together to market our products. Sometimes it's a downtown development organization, sometimes an economic development, chamber of commerce, farm bureau. The list goes on, and it really, again, depends on who kind of the champions are in that community to get it off the ground and then support it moving forward. So
let's just suppose that I'm interested in being a part of the community farmers market, and I know when it's going to be. Am I required as a product vendor to be there on all the days?
No, and so again, with farmers markets here in Ohio, they really establish the rules on who can sell at their market, how often you have to be there, and of course it's seasonal here in Ohio. So for example, I'm a farmer too, and so we would have produce maybe 6 to 8 weeks out of the growing season, and so we were not at the farmers market every week because we didn't have product to sell. And so it's really having that communication with whoever's managing that market and having a conversation about your product schedule and then what they require for you to participate in that market.
So what's the usual cost? You're taking up somebody's space. You're taking up probably some electricity, because I'm assuming there's certain kinds of things that need some refrigeration.
Absolutely.
Or whatever.
Absolutely.
What is the normal fee?
So again, that varies greatly from market to market. So some communities are so interested in having a farmer's market in the community that they charge their vendors nothing or very little. Markets that are financially self-sustainable typically have a little bit more or higher membership fees or fees to participate in that market, because all that money then goes back in to do the management and the promotion for that market. But it's very different from community to community. There is, of course, some research out there that shows that if a market has a paid staff, that they are typically more successful because you have that person dedicated to the workings of the market. But there's a lot of successful markets that are volunteer run and managed as well.
Now, are the farmer markets cooperatives, or is that a different animal?
Some of them are, and that business model works really well for farmers markets. But some farmers markets, again, they're so individual and so community based, and depending on what the needs of the community are, what the needs of the vendors are, and kind of who's the driving force will depend on what legal structure that each market takes.
So a typical customer would be who?
So a typical customer typically, of course, is that person that is very interested in where their food comes from and how it's produced. Time and time again, we hear back from consumers that they really want that relationship with the person that's producing that food. And then it also comes back to, do they have the time to visit farmers markets? Because most of them, of course, don't operate 24/7. And do they have the needed income to support those local producers in the community and regularly shop at farmers markets?
I'm going to ask a question that's always been in the back of my mind. We have larger superstores that not only cater to just about everyone, they also cater to those individuals that are interested in the food that is also at farmers market. So sometimes those superstores bring in the farmers' products and things of that nature. Is that becoming a problem for farmer markets?
I wouldn't say necessarily it's a problem. I would say that, again, farmers markets are not the most convenient way to shop for locally produced items. It really comes back to that experience and that relationship they have with those producers. There are some rumblings around the country that maybe the number of consumers shopping at markets has dropped a little bit here over the last couple years. We don't have any solid research on that yet. That's mainly anecdotal information. But I think it's really that convenience factor. And so while we do agree that locally produced foods is available through different market channels than it was maybe a decade ago, more of the superstores, more of the large grocery stores, more of the small independent grocery stores are purchasing and selling locally produced foods. And so I think we, as those in the farmers market industry, just need to keep in mind that it's really about the relationship, but also, of course, as the millennials become the largest group in this country with buying power, we need to really think about what it is that's going to get millennials to continue to shop at farmers markets and do so in a consistent manner, because that's really critical to the success of those markets.
You know, it's interesting when you talk with individuals that are from Europe. There are many places that have, well, Europe and North Africa and throughout the world, there are large markets where you can. My family, or my wife's family, when they were over in Europe, would get daily their food at some of the marketplaces. And it's interesting to see that throughout Ohio, you have large and small farmer markets.
You really do, and both can be very successful. I would say though that of course, especially in Ohio, a large part of which is rural, and so we don't typically purchase our produce on a daily basis.
Yes, that's
so
right.
part of it is just the shopping habits of the consumers here in the United States. But again, it really comes back to that community and how supportive they are of that farmer's market, and how well the producers do in meeting the customer's needs. You really need both of those to come together to have a successful farmer's market.
I sometimes wonder, not having been a farmer, not having sold to those markets, isn't the price of the food, the produce, the fruits more than typically you'll find in other stores?
Well, that's a great question, Patrick, and we do get that question all the time, and the research shows that that's not the case.
Oh, not the case.
Nationwide, it's very comparable to what you get in grocery stores, and then on top of that, if you take into account the freshness and the reduced food loss or waste, it's really a great value for the consumer, but the research also shows it's more than price. For those consumers that shop at farmers markets, they're really interested in supporting those producers in their local community.
I see. Huh. That's interesting. I also noticed, in traveling from here to, sometimes you go up to Columbus or down to Cincinnati or, larger city, that you have different groups of farms during periods of time that sell like pumpkins or they sell corn or things that would they be considered a farmer's market?
So the farmer's market, when we talk about those are those temporary locations where a group of producers comes together, for like 4 hours on a Saturday morning or 3 hours on a Tuesday evening or something like that, and they offer their products directly to consumers for that limited amount of time, and then they tear down and they go back to their farm.
Oh, okay.
Now, having said that, there's a lot of folks that do produce pumpkins and corn and all kinds of things that participate in farmers markets. But again, farmers markets are not on the farm. They're where the producers come together as a group to directly market their products to consumers.
And I would venture to say that those that sell into the farmers market maybe don't have enough product that they could sell, like for instance, if I have a half an acre of tomatoes, would it be easier to sell them on a farmer's market, or should I try to sell those to a larger producer?
So again, it depends on the farm and the producer. I will say that farmers markets are a great method for smaller producers especially, to start developing those relationships with their customers, develop that rapport with their customers so they can get feedback and say, well, this is the best tomato I've ever had, or, I really love your tomatoes. Would you do onions or garlic so I can make my own salsa? And so it's just really a great way for, again, smaller producers to enter that marketing of their product. Now, having said that, there are many larger producers that diversify their market channels, and they'll sell at farmers markets and they'll sell to their local grocery stores. Not so much on a large wholesale basis, although that can be a fit for some producers. It really kind of depends on their situation. So for example, we have the Southern Ohio Growers Co-op here in the southern part of the state, and that's a group of 5 producers that came together a number of years ago because they were approached by a large retailer wanting to buy locally produced pumpkins. Individually, none of those producers were large enough to serve that large market, and so they came together, and as one piece of their farming operation, they cooperatively marketed pumpkins to this large retailer. So when we talk large, they're buying semi-loads of pumpkins. Having said that, some of those producers still direct market their product through farmers markets, through a farm market, or other methods. So it really, again, depends on what's the best fit for each individual producer.
they're becoming fewer and fewer of us carrying a lot of cash. And sometimes when we go and stop at a farmer's market, it's $10 here or $15 there. What happens if you don't have cash?
So a lot of markets, of course, have figured that out as well. So many producers now accept payment via their smartphones, and there's many apps out there that can help you do that. Other markets, usually in more populated areas, that might have an ATM machine either brought on site or that's a block from the market, and they can say to their customers, there's an ATM right there, and you can do that. And then some markets also have the ability to accept debit credit on behalf of their vendors. So if I have no cash, I go to the market tent, say I want to buy $20 worth of tokens. They swipe my card, give me my $20,
that's good.
and then I spend that on my produce, and then the market reimburses the vendor.
Oh, very good, very good. So, and again, when a person goes to a farmer's market, and it depends upon the community, it's my understanding that there's really a wider variety of products than just fruit and produce.
Absolutely. There is a very wide variety of products. I would guess in the hundreds, depending on the market itself. Now, the thing that we have to keep in mind, as people become more removed from food production, they don't understand necessarily the seasonality. And so there's some education that you need to have to your consumers to help them understand what's available when in our growing season. But then we also have a lot of shelf-stable products, value-added jams and jellies, or what we call cottage foods. There's a lot of baked goods, maple syrup, honey, locally roasted coffee, cheeses and dairy and meat products, and the list just really goes on and on.
Who knows? Maybe soon they'll get into alcohol. Yeah, I jest on that.
I know you do, Patrick, but that's an interesting point. The state of Ohio passed a law about a year ago that now allows local wineries to sell their locally produced wine at farmers markets. Now, there's a permitting process you have to go through, and of course you have to meet the regulations, but that is an option, and some markets are inviting local wineries in to offer their products to their customers as well.
And since Ohio is becoming a really good hops grower in our microbreweries, does that also fall under that realm, or is that something that still legislators need to work out?
That's probably, to my knowledge, something that still needs to be worked out. I think this recent legislation just addressed wine and not beer at this point. But I could be wrong.
Well, the one thing that really amazed me when my wife and I went up to Quebec, this was 10 years ago, etc., large farmers markets, and they had everything. They did sell wine, and they did sell cheese, and it was just amazing. Well, in my frame of mind, I always thought a farmer's market was just a few vendors selling the same products, but that's not necessarily
that's not the case. Again, they're very individual, and we do have some larger, more permanent type markets here in Ohio. Of course, there's the Findlay market in the Cincinnati area, the North market in Columbus, the West Side market in the Cleveland area, and so there are some of those permanent structures that operate almost year-round. But again, it really take into effect the growing season that we have in here in Ohio, and then producers are adopting season extension techniques. So we're seeing more and more high tunnels and greenhouse production, and so we've gotten better over the last decade of being able to extend the season for fresh produce that we offer. Again, depends on the producer and what works best for their operation.
That's interesting. So if I were one of those vendors, and let's just say that we had a medium-sized farmers market, etc., what would be some of the products I would want to plan on growing?
Well, I think, again, for a producer, if you're interested in entering a farmer's market or more than one in your community, now's the time. Visit as many as you can during the summer and the growing season, and figure out what's missing at that market that maybe you could provide. And it's really, you have to think about what there's an opportunity to provide to customers of that market, but also what do you enjoy doing and what grows well in your particular soil and your environment and what you enjoy doing. And so it's really helpful to try to do your research at least a season ahead of time. Start small, grow a little bit. I mean, my husband and I love green beans. I said I want to grow green beans. We put just a few small rows, and I found out I don't like picking green beans. And yes, customers want them, and yes, they sell, but I did not enjoy spending my time that way. So it's really important to kind of, again, find out what it is that the consumer's looking for, but also what do you enjoy doing.
That makes sense. You know, one of the things that we get used to, we've been trained by the superstores, that there's strawberries every year round. And there are just about every kind of fruit. You know, who grows pineapple? And you can find a pineapple. And I think individuals sort of look at the fact that, boy, it's more convenient to go to a superstore than it would be to stop and get a few peaches.
Yep.
And I know that's a thinking process of somebody that's not involved in that.
Well, but that's a great point, Patrick, that I think all of us as folks that direct market produce to our consumers, participate in farmers markets, we really need to think about. Again, as I said, I think it's just maybe 2 years away that the millennials will have the greatest buying power in this country. And so that kind of is is the generation that's like, I want it now. I don't want to have to wait for it. And they're used to buying things on their smart device all the time. And so I think something that we as the industry with producers and farmers markets really need to think about, how can we meet the needs of the millennial generation, as well as remain true to our values of really being transparent in how our food is produced and developing those relationships. You know, when the boxed meal services first came online, there's many of those still around, and some struggle to retain customers, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But again, we don't cook really a lot in our homes anymore. We eat out a lot or on the go, and so how can we develop our products and services with convenience in mind for our greatest potential group of customers and buyers as the millennials again continue to increase their buying power.
And so the communities, whoever is the champion, how do they get the word out about that there's a farmer's market? Because it seems that during the wintertime, at least in certain rural areas, there just isn't any farmer markets.
Yeah, they're very limited. Again, it goes back to the growing season and what producers can do. So there's a lot of ways that farmers markets can promote that they're there. Participate in other community events. Make sure that you interact with some of your local organizations, like your local Chamber of Commerce or Economic Development or farm-based organizations. Schools is another way to help spread the word that the farmers market is there. Visibility is really critical for a lot of farmers markets, especially new markets that want to start up, because it's not so convenient, and we don't really have year-round hours. People can tend to forget about us. So signage or flags or those kinds of things, and then of course social media, and really start to build your customer base. And really, once you get those folks really involved in the market and understand the value to the community, they're your best marketers as well, because they're going to tell everybody they know. But that can be a challenge for sure.
One of the things that I've noticed on, going through smaller towns, that they sort of, yes, there is a farmer's market, but it's sort of put inconveniently for the individuals. And my thinking is that since farmers markets are such an integral part of the community, you would want to have some of the best places, really good parking and
absolutely,
and you should never hide a farmer's market.
Exactly. Visibility is critical, and that can be difficult, especially in some of our smaller rural communities where they don't have large open areas in their downtowns, because parking is critical. You have to have a place for the vendors to park. You have to have a place for the customers to park. And so really, again, it's forming those relationships within your community and kind of talking through what might be the best fit for the market, and that's going to be beneficial for all. One of the things that I do encourage communities to think about if you're wanting to start a market in your community is work with your potential farmers and vendors that would participate in that farmers market, because a lot of times we don't see how much work and all the logistics that are involved in running a farmers market. And so if you don't bring that perspective to the table, you might be setting yourself up for failure. So I encourage you early on to work with your farmers and potential vendors and find out what's important to them. And on the flip side of that too, it's really important to work with your consumers, your potential consumers in your community. And you really have to marry those two, the needs of the consumers and the producers, to come together to have a successful farmers market. So if you're starting one or wanting to start one, now's the time to start doing your research to prepare for next year. Yes.
That's interesting. One final question, because I think we're running out of time. When you have a farmer's market, do the different vendors have to share the money?
No, typically the farmer's market, you pay as a vendor typically to have a space.
Okay.
So that gives you your space to set up your booth. But any of the sales that you generate typically go back to that individual producer solely. Now there are some markets around the country and a few here in Ohio that charge a percentage of sales. And that money then is used to pay a manager, pay for insurance, do the promotions for the market and that kind of thing. But for the most part, any sales that the vendor does goes right back into their business.
Well, I really appreciate your sharing some of this. Not being a farmer, there's certain things that we assume, and the only thing that we can see is not, since we're not directly involved with the markets, etc. This and that, these and those, and in reality. So what's the best way if they want to have additional information? How can they? Should they contact you?
Sure, they can reach out to me, and my email address will be at the end of this broadcast, as well as our website where you can find more information. And the other thing I encourage you to do is visit as many farmers markets as you can if you think you would like to start a market in your community. Find out what's working, talk to the vendors, talk to the managers, and just learn from others' experience. I've found the industry very willing to share, so you don't have to make all the mistakes on your own. And some markets, some communities even come back and say, you know what, I don't think it's a fit for us, but we're going to support this market in a neighboring community, and that way we can all benefit.
Well, one of the things that Wanda, my wife, and I really enjoy is the corn.
Absolutely.
And so we're looking for that season to begin. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So any final words of wisdom that you want to give to anyone? Or
I just encourage you to go back and take the opportunity this season and visit as many farmers markets and support our local producers and help your communities thrive.
Christie, thank you for letting me come on and ask a bunch of questions.
Thank you, Patrick. It's a pleasure.